Do you want to learn the tricks that top leaders use to get the most out of themselves and their teams? Well, Naftali Hoff is here to help. Lead to succeed. Picks the brains of top leaders to learn about their challenges, insights, and best practices. Here's Naftali.
Hello, Lead to Succeed Nation. It's Naftali Hoff, and welcome to Lead to Succeed, episode 155. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Richard Atherton. Richard is a partner at FirstHuman, a business coaching firm that helps CEOs, leaders, and top executives achieve leadership breakthroughs and organizational goals with a human-first approach. Its clients include Adidas, Volkswagen, Heineken, PwC, UNICEF, and the Olympics. Richard has nearly 10 years of expertise in leadership development and has helped numerous clients achieve significant personal and professional breakthroughs. His own background of overcoming multiple addictions and personal traumas has been crucial in shaping his passion for humanizing the leadership culture within organizations. He was notably involved in helping leaders at the logistics company CEVA close a $400 million profitability gap. He's also the host of the Being Human podcast that provides insights on leadership and well-being and reaches 11.9 thousand subscribers. Richard, glad to have you on the show today.
Wonderful to be here.
So I will tell you, you teased me a little bit, so to speak, with the bio. You talked about overcoming addiction and other things. Tell us your story. How did you get here, and why do you do what you do?
Okay. Well, before we came on, you asked me where I was in the world, and despite my background here being New York City, I'm actually in the southeast of England in a town called Bury St Edmunds, which was famous in medieval times for being a center of Christianity across Europe. And I'm back where I grew up. So I've lived in many cities around the UK and Europe, and I'm back very close to where I grew up, and that's in Suffolk in England, to a middle-class family. My dad was an engineer, my mum was a social worker, and they had absolutely the best intents for me and materially provided for me wonderfully. I lived in the countryside and had a fantastic life in many ways. And they set me up for success. I did well in school. I got a degree in electronic engineering. I joined a big corporate firm. And at the age of 22, 23, I always remember being at a party with a friend of mine's girlfriend, and I told her how much I earned. And this was, in the day in London, in the city. And she was like, "My God, that's more than my dad and any of the dads of any of my friends," right? And so I had this high of sort of accelerating rapidly into this career that was very well remunerated, and I kind of ticked all of the boxes in terms of expectations of my parents to get me there. And I was a binge alcoholic. I was a functioning alcoholic. And I think my ability to suppress all of my feelings through the use of alcohol and other means was really a driver of my success. It allowed me just to focus on the task ahead of me, the exam ahead of me, the interview I needed to do, whatever the PowerPoint I needed to create for my client when I joined the ranks of management consulting. I had that high functioning, addictive personality. And it served me very well until I got to my late 20s and realized that many of my friends were growing up. They had families, they had kids, they weren't drinking so much. And I was drinking perhaps harder than I had done even at university. And my brother persuaded me to go on a self-development course. And I went through the motions of this self-development course, and it was useful. It had me reflect on who I was and on my life. But the killer was they had this program where you had to volunteer to enroll other people in coming on to this program, which is, slightly questionable as a business practice. And in fact, this organization got shut down in France as a result of that. But nonetheless, the expectation was you volunteered on the phones, as they called it, to enroll other people on this program. And I turned up one evening to do my volunteer service, and the guy who was running these volunteer sessions said to me, "Richard, I'm going to have to send you home. You're too hungover. I can't let you be on the phones." And I thought to myself, who the hell are you to tell the great management consultant, Richard Atherton, that he can't do a shift in your poxy volunteer call center? Right? That was the hubris and the arrogance of my attitude at the time. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it was the first time in my life somebody had said to me, "Richard, there's a problem with your drinking." And that sent me, not immediately, but it sent me on a journey of acceptance. In the first case, acceptance of the fact I had a drinking problem, and then ultimately to Alcoholics Anonymous and to quit drinking. And after a period of time in the 12-step rooms, I started to ask the question, well, why did I drink? Why did I drink in the first place? What was it that was driving me into those behaviors? And I wasn't prepared to accept the thesis in the 12-step paradigm, if you like, that any of your addictions, it's a disease, an incurable disease. And I wasn't prepared to accept that. I knew that there must be a reason for why I'd had these habits. And that took me back to my childhood, back to trauma. And I read a brilliant book called Homecoming by John Bradshaw. And in that book, there was a number of exercises which had you revisit scenarios in your childhood, circumstances in your childhood, and release some of the pain and the grief associated with those events. And over a 10-year period, I did an awful lot of healing work, both on aspects of my childhood and the way that my parents behaved around me. As I say, wonderful parents. I've got no animosity towards them whatsoever. And yet certain aspects of their behavior rubbed up against me in a certain way that caused me pain. And added to that, I also discovered that I had a very painful birth where I nearly died. And that was also a major contributing factor to the way that I experienced life. I basically came into the world terrified, and I never really found a way to unhook myself from that orientation towards life, and until I got into the therapy work. And so for a period of my early 30s up until late 30s, I was continuing to work as a consultant, but doing an awful lot of self-development, trauma release work. Spent a lot of time in your country, in California, around Santa Monica, doing a lot of crying, bashing a lot of cushions, and really getting what I needed to get out of my system. And this whole experience gave me a very deep interest in the human condition, what it means to be human, what makes us tick, what has us thrive in the world. And I wanted to bring those insights into the world of business, and ultimately led me now to be working with clients as a coach, although I'm slipping in and out of the coach and the therapist role, depending on the needs of the individual I'm working with. And I think we really need a term that describes whomever it is who is capable of both working in a future orientation and thinking about what somebody has in terms of career goals and business goals and how they achieve them, and where necessary, a backwards orientation where there are aspects of one's prior experience that you need to grieve and heal in order to reach even bigger heights in the future. So I surf those two orientations when I work with clients. So that's where that brings me up to date, and that's what I do now. Several years ago, I founded FirstHuman, includes in the title. We're a coaching development firm, but with a very strong focus on the human dimension. And our mission in life is to is to unleash the leadership capability in everyone. That's in every organization we come in touch with every individual we work with. How do we have that person unleash their full potential? And that's what my life is dedicated to now.
So just to clarify, would it be fair to say that you began as a more traditional business consultant, focusing on businesses and the numbers and all those pieces, the processes, and now you're focused as a coach on the
Yes.
leader or on the people?
Exactly. That's the transition career-wise.
It's also
Absolutely.
interesting to me because most coaches, by definition, are not therapists, not trained in therapy. I happen to have a PsyD, but I don't have it in clinical psychology. I have it in organizational psychology. So I have some experience in psychology. I do a lot of writing on the topic, but I'm still not a therapist, and I don't advertise myself as such. And so if I have a client that I feel genuinely needs a therapist primarily, then I refer out, to that individual and only provide, I try to make a very clear distinction between coaching and therapy and what I do. So I'm curious to know how it works for you. Are people coming to you mainly because they seek a coach, and in your work you sense that there's a therapeutic need as well, and so you work with them in that direction, or does it often come from the other side? How does the process typically look for you?
It's more the former. It's more somebody comes to me needing a coach. And yeah, I make a conscious decision not to make that distinction. I don't limit my work with that individual to a coaching frame. And I'm working with the whole human and their whole experience.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever the needs are of the client in that moment, I'm going to orientate myself to that individual. My reference material
Mm-hmm.
is the individual in front of me.
So what would you say are the main things that people are coming to you for? Because like when leaders are listening to our discussion, oftentimes what I find is that even though I've been out as a coach, so to speak, for over a decade now, one of the things that I find to be challenging, just in terms of helping create, let's call it awareness, is the fact that everybody knows they need a mechanic. Everybody knows they need a doctor. Not everybody goes to a doctor, myself included sometimes, but everybody understands fundamentally, I need a dentist, I need a landscaper, whatever that might look like. There's certain things that are normative. And so you hire service providers to attend to those issues. I need a cleaning, support, whatever it is. When it comes to a coach, it's not necessarily expected. It's not necessarily intuitive. A lot of people actually think of a coach as a therapist, and a lot of people have an aversion to therapy. They feel that therapy by definition means there's something wrong with me. So I'm curious to know, what are the main things that people are coming to you for, and how do you communicate the importance of coaching to people who don't intuitively understand it?
To answer the first question first, nearly always it's business performance. If this is a senior leader of an organization, it's how do I reach my business goals? How do I double my turnover? How do I triple my turnover? Issues of that nature. They've got a very high ambition for their firm, and they recognize either that they themselves have got some growth to do in order to become the leader who creates those results in the world, or they recognize that there are members of their team who would be served by some development, and to have them step up. I mean, very often in organizations, people will have got to the management team by way of their expertise in a particular area, that people come to them for their knowledge, and they are very good at solving problems within a narrow set of parameters. But as the business seeks to expand, a lot of the issues that are going to come up are unknown and lean much more on somebody's leadership capabilities than they do their existing expertise. And so in that scenario, very often CEOs are saying, well, can you work with this person or that person and help them make that transition from technical expert to true leader? So that tends to be the scenario that people come to us with. In terms of how do you develop an interest in coaching for people who haven't really been sold on the benefits, there's no easy answer to that, because whereas you say your examples of somebody, a gardener, let's say, to mow your lawn and so on, people intuitively know what it means. They've had some experience of what it means to mow a lawn, or they've had somebody close to them mow their lawn, right? They have a grip of what the process is and what the benefits are at the end of it. With coaching, not so much. They've either not experienced themselves, or they've not seen somebody grow and develop themselves through a coaching process. And so what I'm really seeking to do is create scenarios where I can have transformative conversations with people. And so somebody might come with me with a very practical business issue, and they may seek me out because they know my past as a management consultant, where my job was to provide operational advice, strategic advice based on a particular business issue they might have. And then what I'll seek to do is coach them, and there's a fine line here, but pivot the conversation into a coaching conversation, and seek as much as possible to ask the right questions that get them thinking a different way, that get them start to think about perhaps there are behaviors that they themselves are engaging in that are contributing to this problem. Perhaps there's some underlying belief they've got about what's possible that may be closing off certain options that they might have, and have them start to see that. And then they may come out of the conversation by saying something like, oh God, this has felt like therapy, or this has felt really cathartic, or you've really opened my eyes in ways I weren't expecting. And then I can say, well, that you've just had a coaching experience, right? And now they've had an experience, and now they've got something to latch onto. And obviously the next stage is, well, imagine if we were having a conversation like this every week or every 2 weeks, or imagine I was having conversations like this with your team, or imagine we got your whole team to be having conversations like this with each other. Imagine the power of that. That's the way I look to solve that issue, as you say, of people not having the intuitive grasp of the benefits of coaching.
Nice. So let me ask you, in the bio I read that you help executives, top leaders achieve leadership breakthroughs and organizational goals with a human-first approach. So what do you mean by that?
So whenever we go into an organization, we can always tell who the leader is being based on our conversations with the people who work for them. It's usually quite easy to make a diagnosis regarding the circumstances of that business that relates to how the top leader is showing up. And that's our premise, if you like, when we're working with organizational issues, is that largely they are not a result of external circumstances. Largely they are a result of the quality of being of the leaders in that organization, and primarily whoever's got the most influence and the most power. And so we're not looking at it through the lens of, is the strategy right? Is the product market fit right? Are the operational processes fit for purpose? Although those are all important questions. We're asking, who are the leaders of this organization being? What is their orientation to each other? What is their orientation to the goals of this organization that they say they're committed to? What is the level of that commitment that they saying they have? Is it really there? So these are the types of questions that we're asking when we're entering organizations, and really that's the root of our human first approach.
Okay, so staying there for a minute, let's say we're not having a quote coaching conversation, but you're just offering some advice. Somebody comes to you and they're just looking for some way by which they're not feeling as a leader that they're doing their very best work. What advice would you give to a leader to begin the process of self-introspection? Like, where would you have them begin to look at and say, is there alignment here? Is there integrity here? or not, and sort of begin the process of revealing the blind spots, peeling back the layers a little bit, fixing the mess that they may have created, because they oftentimes can be really good from a business standpoint, strategy standpoint, but not very good from a people and leadership standpoint.
Right. Yeah, great question. The first step is to find a way to break their pattern. Now, when we work with leaders, and certainly when we work with groups of leaders, we'll take them off site for 2-3 days at a time, and we'll have multiple sessions. We'll create big chunks of time where people are forced to sit down and spend time with themselves. But if you're talking about advice to an individual leader, it's where in your life can you find a way to break your routine and put yourself in a situation where you are being invited to reflect on yourself. Now, for some, it might be a journaling practice. For others, it might be taking up a breathing practice. For others, it might be finding a mentor or a coach that they can sit with for an hour a week or whatever it might be. But it's stopping, it's slowing down and giving yourself the mental space to begin to reflect. And it can be excruciatingly painful for some.
I would imagine.
I don't know if you've seen the research on. They did some research with people, and they were offered to sit with their own thoughts for a certain amount of time, or receive an electric shock. And
right, they took the shock.
The result, the results were something like most people would rather have the electric shock than do more than like 1 minute of being on their own,
right.
their own thoughts. So there's something in the human condition which makes it extremely painful for most of us to just be on our own with our own thoughts. And yet that's where all the gold is. That's where your intuition comes from. That's where your lateral thinking comes from. That's where the answers to these seemingly intractable questions come from. It's in the space between the doing.
Yeah. It's interesting because I'm listening again, reading again, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I have a mastermind group, and we're going through the habits. And he has that story, I don't know if you're familiar, of the guy who goes to the doctor and he feels like there's something just not right. And the doctor gives him this prescription. And the prescription turns out to be like 4 different commands. And I don't remember exactly what they are, but more or less, like go to a place where you were happiest as a child. So he goes to the beach. He'd probably go to a forest, but he goes to the beach. And then it's something like think back. Not a lot. The details are sparse. And then there's a third one, and it's through that exercise, which is a difficult exercise, but he has to spend 3 hours, I think, on each one, really goes through a process of reconnecting with his deeper self and who he is and where he's trying to go with things. It might be related to habit 2, which is one I'm focusing on now, which is begin with the end in mind, right? To really understand what it is that you want to get out of life. Such an important question. Another important question, and you didn't hit on it just now, but I had it, I'd seen it, I think, in your bio about humanizing the leadership culture. It's interesting because just yesterday I did back-to-back trainings on the topic of empowerment. And I told the audience, these are all mid-level managers to senior level managers of a large company. I said to them that, a culture doesn't just exist. It doesn't come into existence. It's made, right? It's the development of the values and the behaviors and the thought processes, the biases, et cetera, of the leadership typically within a company or organization that ultimately creates a sense of this is how we behave, this is what we do, these are our values, et cetera. So I'm curious to know your take on culture, the importance of culture, where you see culture go wrong in companies, and if you had to offer a particular piece of advice to a leader to improve culture within the company or organization, what would that be?
Yes, great question. So I've got a background in software engineering. So my first job as a consultant was in the software space, and I experienced many teams where there was a very strong focus on empowered individuals. And I think that the software community were one of the first communities to really latch on to the power of humanizing culture and creating an environment where everybody gets to contribute. And so I experienced firsthand those cultures where people there's a very heavy emphasis on turn taking. There's this concept, and you may be familiar with it, with agile practices and a strong emphasis on reflection and retrospective, where people are constantly asking themselves, how could we do things differently? People are encouraged to speak up about their experience in the team and what's working for them and what isn't, and what collectively they can change as a team. And so my early experience into corporate life was those types of cultures. And then as I started to move into different circles and got more into management circles, I noticed how different it was. And there wasn't that same emphasis on the human experience of those people in the team. It's much more about the results and bottom line and what can we achieve by when. And so I have that background, and I've felt, again, this is the theme of this, I've experienced what it means to be in those cultures and how different it is and how freeing it is and how honored and valued one feels in teams which pay close attention to that human experience. And so I want as part of my work when I deal with leaders is to draw attention to the type of environment they're creating, the rituals that they are engaging in with their teams, the ceremonies, because we're all ritualistic beings. We all engage in ceremonies the whole time in our work cultures. We just don't use those terms, but we are. What's an agenda if not some form of ritual? What's a ceremony if it's not going around the room and demanding updates, right? So these are all so we're ritualistic beings. We exist in a world of highly habitualized modes of operating with each other. And so when I'm working with leaders, I'm always asking them to pay attention to that when we get into a question about team dynamics, and then asking them to reflect on what do they value and what do you think their teams value, and what processes that you're engaging culturally do you think serve those values, and what are detracting from those values, and what can you try and experiment with? Because culture's culture's very fragile, and it's very easily shifted quite quickly by leadership behaviors. And so we need to take a very experimental stance when it comes to culture, and try one thing at a time and then see the impact. And when we're dealing with complex systems, which organizational cultures are, we're subject to the law of unintended consequences. So it's important to take things slowly when we do take action, from the perspective of having reflected on your own values as a leader, what you perceive to be the values of those around you, having inquired into that, what's important to you, what's important to them, come up with some experiments to try, and then see what happens if we tweak this code process. What happens if we start every meeting with a check-in? What happens if we end every meeting asking everybody to say something positive? These are the type of hacks that we can engage in when it comes to culture.
Nice.
In terms of when can it go wrong, it's a brilliant book called Moose Heads on the Table, which, if you're interested in empowering cultures, you might be interested in. And I've actually interviewed both authors for that on my podcast. But one of the authors of that book talks about going into cultures and where she takes the stance of radical empowerment and delegating as much of the management authority down into the organization as possible. And she's worked in a series of organizations, hotels, IT services firms, and so on, across multiple sectors. And the common thread in her stories is, I go in, I change the culture, their results skyrocket, I leave, I go back 5 years later, and it's back to where it was, and it's the same culture. And it's because a new leader has come in, they haven't really appreciated what this culture is. They've slipped back into command and control style leadership, and all of the benefits of empowered cultures are lost. And that's what I mean about fragility. So how can things go wrong? It's when, I suppose, it's ultimately when a leader comes into an organization and hasn't got sufficient trust in the innate capability of other human beings in order to allow for an empowered cultures, because it takes for a senior leader a leap of faith to move forward into an empowered culture, because suddenly I need to trust the whole organization to collectively or selectively make management decisions within my nominal scope of influence or control. So it's a trust game, and some leaders don't have it, and that's how cultures could go bad, is when they slowly pull back control into their own position and disempower people as they do so.
Wow. Yeah, we talked a lot about trust yesterday during those trainings. It's absolutely critical. I'd love to talk more in depth, but we are going to pivot now to rapid fire. 2 reasons every leader should start a podcast.
2 reasons why every leader should start a podcast. It will force you to get comfortable on camera.
Okay.
I hated going on camera when I first started this. And
Number
in
2?
today's world, we live on camera, right?
Yeah, we do.
We live on camera. So this will rapidly accelerate your comfort with being on camera and in public. Number 2, it will improve your listening skills. Because
mine have improved dramatically.
Because
look, 155 episodes in, you listen to a lot of people. The good news is you learn a lot too.
I mean, but that would be the number 2 reason. You improve your listening skills, because in order to get the best stories out of your your guests, you have to be able to listen.
A hidden gem in the UK few people know about.
Okay, so there's a place called Pinford Mill in Suffolk, the county I'm now in, which is a site dedicated to the works of Constable, who was a famous English painter, and it's an absolutely beautiful spot based around the setting of one of his famous paintings. You can meander down the river. You can view all of his works in this old mill house, and you can see the place where he painted his famous painting of the mill pond scene. There you go.
Your favorite, beautiful, by the way, your favorite actor.
Who's my favorite actor? He's not really an actor. I'm going to cheat on this one. He's a comedian who acted, but a very famous comedian called Peter Cook. Peter Cook and Dudley Moore were a very famous British double act, and he was absolutely fantastic as a comic actor and a comic.
A quote that you live by or think about often?
You told me this is coming. You told me to write something down. Can I come back to that one? I'll come back to that.
Sure.
One.
Something we should do each day to improve our physical health.
Start a morning routine.
Morning routine. Yes, absolutely. Okay. A productivity tip that helps you to get more done.
developing the art of letting go, developing the art of catching yourself when you're in a negative interpretation of circumstances, letting that go back to wherever it came from.
Are you ready for the quote at this point?
Yeah. So success is going from one failure to the next with no loss of enthusiasm.
There, I like that one. Yeah. Okay. So, Richard, you've shared so much. How can people connect with you, learn more about your work, and hopefully work with you?
FirstHuman.com, FIRST human.com. Yep, you'll find our leadership development programs. You can kick us if you're connect with myself or any one of my fellow coaches at FirstHuman, who are all equally fantastic. You can get one-to-one coaching there. You can also find the podcast there. You can sign up to our newsletter, which will give you access to our regular roundtable events and webinars that we run on a regular basis. Yes, all there, firsthuman.com.
Awesome. And finally, before I let you go, please leave us with one life lesson.
Weird your way to greatness. When you're presented with an opportunity to do something that feels super weird, but your intuition is telling you, give it a go, do it.
I have to really think about that one. I imagine there's a lot of weirdness and much of what I do, not even realizing it at this point. Anyway, Richard, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've enjoyed the conversation, coach to coach, leader to leader, and just human to human. I've enjoyed it on all levels, and thank you very much for coming on to Lead to Succeed, sharing your insights, your wisdom, your experiences, and challenges. And I know it's going to be a real hit with my listeners. So thank you again.
Thank you. No, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye now.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode and for investing in yourself so that you can lead to succeed. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show. Your feedback gives the show more social proof and encourages more folks to listen.